The blood from her split knuckles dripped onto the dusty ground of the alley, while three men circled her like wolves, their breath reeking of whiskey and malice in the sweltering heat of Mojave, California, in July of 1878. Daisy Renshaw had come to this god-forsaken town 3 months ago with nothing but a carpetbag and determination, fleeing a life back east that had offered her nothing but servitude and shame. She had not traveled 1,500 miles across this vast country to let drunk cowards put their hands on her without consequence. The tallest one, a lanky man with a scar running down his cheek, lunged at her first. Daisy sidestepped and drove her fist into his ribs with all the strength her 5'6" frame could muster. Her father had been a bare-knuckle boxer before the drink took him, and he had taught her one valuable lesson before he died: hit hard, hit fast, and never show fear. "You little wildcat," the scarred man wheezed, clutching his side. "We was just having a bit of fun." "Your fun ends where my patience begins," Daisy said, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. She kept her hands up, her feet positioned the way Papa had shown her. The second man, shorter and stockier with a face like a bulldog, charged from her left. She pivoted and brought her knee up hard into his stomach. He doubled over with a grunt that turned into retching sounds. The third man, the drunkest of them all, stumbled forward with his arms outstretched. "Come here, sweetheart. We just want to talk." "We have nothing to discuss," Daisy said, and she delivered a solid punch to his jaw that sent him reeling backward into a stack of empty crates. The wood splintered under his weight, but 3 against 1 were still bad odds, and the scarred man had recovered enough to grab her from behind, pinning her arms to her sides. His breath was hot and foul against her neck. "Not so tough now, are you?" Daisy threw her head back as hard as she could, feeling the satisfying crunch of his nose against her skull. He howled and released her, and she spun around ready to fight until her last breath if necessary. That was when she saw him. He stood at the mouth of the alley, backlit by the late afternoon sun, and for a moment Daisy thought she was hallucinating from the heat and exhaustion. He had to be at least 6 feet 4 inches tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the light. His hair hung past his shoulders in dark waves, and his arms, visible beneath his rolled-up sleeves, were corded with muscle that spoke of a life spent wrestling with nature itself. A thick beard covered his jaw, and his eyes, even from this distance, were the color of mountain stone. "The lady seems to have made her feelings clear," he said, his voice a deep rumble that carried authority without needing to shout. "I suggest you men move along." The scarred man, still holding his bleeding nose, spat blood onto the ground. "This is none of your concern, stranger. The girl owes us money." "That is a lie," Daisy said sharply. "I have never seen these men before they accosted me." The mountain man took a step forward, and Daisy noticed he moved with surprising grace for someone so large. "Are you calling her a liar?" "I'm saying this is our business, not yours," the bulldog-faced man said, having recovered enough to speak. But his voice lacked conviction. Even drunk, these men could recognize a superior predator when they saw one. The stranger took 3 more steps into the alley. "I am making it my business. You have 3 seconds to walk away, or I will carry you out of here myself." The drunk one, who had fallen into the crates, scrambled to his feet. "There are 3 of us and 1 of you." "Yes," the mountain man said calmly. "Hardly seems fair to you." His hand rested casually on his belt, near where Daisy could see the glint of a hunting knife in a worn leather sheath. But more than the weapon, it was the absolute certainty in his stance that made the decision for them. The scarred man grabbed his companions by their shirts. "This is not worth it. Come on." They stumbled past the mountain man, giving him a wide berth, and disappeared into the dusty street beyond. The sound of their retreating footsteps faded, leaving only the distant sounds of Mojave's main street, the lowing of cattle, the creak of wagon wheels, and the ever-present whisper of desert wind. Daisy let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Now that the danger had passed, her hands were shaking, and the pain in her knuckles was making itself known. "Thank you," she said, "but I had the situation under control." The corner of his mouth twitched, and she realized he was suppressing a smile. "I could see that. You fight well. My father taught me." He nodded, as if this explained everything. Up close, he was even more imposing, but Daisy found herself unafraid. There was something in his eyes, a gentleness that contradicted his fierce appearance. "Vincent Harper," he said, extending a hand that was roughly the size of a dinner plate. "Most people just call me Vince." She took his hand, noting the calluses that came from hard work and the careful way he moderated his grip so as not to hurt her. "Daisy Renshaw. Most people just call me Daisy." "Pleased to make your acquaintance, Miss Renshaw, though I wish it were under better circumstances." His gaze dropped to her bleeding knuckles. "You should clean those. Desert dirt can cause infection." "I was on my way to the boarding house when those men cornered me," Daisy said. She realized she was still holding his hand and released it quickly, feeling warmth creep into her cheeks that had nothing to do with the oppressive heat. "The Widow Patterson's place?" Vince asked. "Yes. Do you know it?" "I know most places in Mojave. I am in town to resupply before heading back up into the mountains." He gestured down the alley toward the street. "May I walk you there? Those men might be waiting." Daisy wanted to refuse out of principle. She had not come all this way to depend on anyone, especially not a man, but practical sense won over pride. "That would be acceptable. Thank you." They walked side by side through the dusty streets of Mojave. The town was small, perhaps 200 souls on a good day, clustered around the railroad depot that had sprung up 5 years earlier. False-fronted buildings lined the main street, a general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, a hotel, and a handful of other establishments that served the miners, ranchers, and drifters who passed through this harsh corner of California. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The heat was still intense, radiating up from the packed earth and making the air shimmer. Daisy could feel sweat trickling down her spine beneath her simple cotton dress. She glanced at Vincent from the corner of her eye. He seemed unbothered by the heat, as if he were carved from the same stone as the mountains he called home. "What brings you down from the mountains, Mr. Harper?" she asked, as much to break the silence as from genuine curiosity. "Supplies, mostly," he said. "Coffee, salt, ammunition. Things I cannot make or hunt myself. I come down 3, maybe 4 times a year." "You live up there alone?" "I do." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "It has been that way for 5 years now." There was a story there. Daisy could sense it, but she did not press. Everyone who came west had stories they preferred to leave unspoken. "It must be lonely." "Sometimes," he admitted, "but the mountains do not judge. They do not lie. They are what they are, and I respect that." They reached the boarding house, a 2-story structure with peeling white paint and a sagging porch. It was not much, but it was clean and cheap, which was all Daisy could afford on her wages from the general store. She turned to face him, shielding her eyes from the sun. "Thank you again, Mr. Harper. I'm in your debt." "No debt," he said firmly. "What those men tried to do was wrong. Any decent person would have stopped them." "Not everyone is decent," Daisy said quietly, thinking of the many people who had walked past while she fought, averting their eyes and hurrying on. "No," Vince agreed. "They are not." He hesitated, as if wrestling with whether to say more. "Miss Renshaw, if I may ask, why did those men target you? Was it truly random, or is there something more I should know?" Daisy considered lying, but something about this man inspired honesty. "The owner of the saloon, Cyrus Blackwell, has been pressing me to work for him. Not as a serving girl," she added, seeing understanding dawn in Vince's eyes. "I have refused repeatedly. I suspect he sent those men to frighten me into compliance." Vince's jaw tightened beneath his beard. "That is low, even for a saloon owner." "It is the way of the world," Daisy said with a shrug she did not feel. "Women like me, without family or protection, we are seen as fair game." "You are not game," Vince said, and there was steel in his voice. "You are a person deserving of respect." The simple declaration caught Daisy off guard. She had not expected such courtesy from a mountain man, had assumed he would be rough and unrefined. "That is kind of you to say." "It is not kindness, it is fact." He touched the brim of his hat. "I will be in town for 3 more days. If you need anything, or if those men return, I am staying at the hotel." Daisy nodded, not trusting herself to speak. As she watched him walk away, his broad back disappearing into the gathering dusk, she felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. It had been so long since anyone had shown her genuine concern without expecting something in return. Inside the boarding house, Widow Patterson, a stern woman in her 50s with iron gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, looked up from her knitting. "You are late, girl. And what happened to your hands?" "I had some trouble," Daisy said, heading toward the pump in the kitchen. "It is handled now." "Trouble seems to follow you," the widow observed, but there was no malice in her tone. "Clean yourself up and try to stay out of sight for the rest of the evening." Daisy pumped cold water over her scraped knuckles, wincing as the dirt and blood washed away. The skin was torn in several places and bruises were already forming. She would have difficulty working at the store tomorrow, but it could not be helped. That night, lying in her narrow bed in the room she shared with two other women who worked as laundresses, Daisy could not stop thinking about Vincent Harper. She told herself it was merely gratitude that anyone would feel warmth toward a person who had intervened on their behalf. But she knew it was more than that. Something about the way he had looked at her, as if she were someone worth protecting, someone who mattered, had awakened feelings she had thought long buried. The next morning, Daisy reported to work at Duncan's general store with her hands bandaged. Mr. Duncan, a portly man with a perpetual frown, noted the bandages but said nothing. He was not an unkind employer, merely practical. As long as she could work, he did not care about her personal affairs. The morning passed slowly, with few customers. Daisy restocked shelves, swept the floor, and helped the blacksmith's wife select fabric for a new dress. Around midday, the bell above the door chimed, and Vincent Harper walked in. He had to duck slightly to clear the doorframe, and his presence seemed to fill the entire store. He had bathed since yesterday, his hair still damp and tied back with a leather cord, and he wore a clean shirt that somehow made his muscular build even more apparent. "Miss Renshaw," he said, nodding politely. "I hope I am not disturbing you." "Not at all, Mr. Harper," Daisy said, acutely aware of Mr. Duncan watching them with interest from behind the counter. "How may I help you?" "I need supplies," Vince said, pulling a list from his pocket. "Coffee, salt, dried beans, flour, sugar if you have it, ammunition for a Henry rifle and a Colt revolver, fish hooks, line, and needles." Daisy took the list, noting the neat handwriting. "This will take me a few minutes to gather. Would you like to wait?" "I will wait as long as necessary." He glanced at her bandaged hands. "How are you healing?" "Well enough. They are just scrapes." "You fought well yesterday. Where did you learn?" "My father was a boxer before drink destroyed him. He taught me the basics when I was young." Daisy began gathering the items on his list, grateful for the task that gave her something to do with her hands. He said a woman should know how to defend herself, because the world was not a safe place. He was right about that, Vince said, following her through the aisles, though it should not be that way. "Many things should not be as they are," Daisy observed, reaching for a tin of coffee on a high shelf. Before she could stretch too far, Vince's arm extended past her, his fingers easily grasping the tin. "Allow me," he said, handing it to her. Their fingers brushed, and Daisy felt that same warmth from yesterday spread through her. "Thank you," she murmured, adding the coffee to the growing pile of goods. They worked in companionable silence, Daisy gathering items while Vince carried the heavier ones to the counter. Mr. Duncan tallied the total with evident satisfaction. It was a substantial order. "That will be $18.40, Duncan announced. Vince paid in gold coins, the kind that came from patient prospecting in mountain streams. As Duncan wrapped the purchases in brown paper, Vince turned to Daisy. "Miss Renshaw, I wonder if I might impose on you for a favor." "Of course," Daisy said, surprised. "I'm unfamiliar with the latest novels. I was hoping you might recommend something for the long winter nights. I've read everything I own twice over." The request was so unexpected, so at odds with her assumptions about mountain men, that Daisy laughed. "You read?" "Is that so surprising?" Vince asked, and there was amusement in his eyes. "I may live in the wilderness, but I value learning. My mother was a school teacher before she married. She ensured my education was thorough." "Forgive me," Daisy said quickly. "I meant no offense. I simply assumed," she trailed off, embarrassed, "that I was an unlettered savage," Vince supplied gently. "It is a common assumption. I take no offense." Daisy led him to the small shelf of books Duncan kept in stock. Most were practical manuals or religious texts, but there were a few novels. If you enjoy adventure, I recommend this, she said, pulling down a copy of a popular Western tale. Or if you prefer something more philosophical, perhaps this. She selected another volume. Vince examined both books carefully. What do you recommend? The philosophical one, Daisy said without hesitation. It asks questions worth pondering. Then that is what I shall take. He purchased the book and added it to his parcels. Perhaps when I return to town we might discuss it. I would enjoy that, Daisy said, meaning it more than she cared to admit. As Vince gathered his purchases, preparing to leave, Mr. Duncan cleared his throat. Begging your pardon, but I could not help overhearing. If you are heading back into the mountains soon, Mr. Harper, I have a delivery that needs to reach the mining camp at Silver Creek. Would you be willing to transport it for a fee? Vince considered this. Silver Creek is a day's ride from my cabin, but it is on the way. What needs delivering? Medical supplies for the camp doctor. He sent word 3 weeks ago, and I have been waiting for someone reliable to make the journey. The trail is rough, and there have been reports of bandits. Bandits would find me an unprofitable target, Vince said dryly. I can take the supplies. When do you need them delivered? Within the week, if possible. The doctor's running low on essentials. They negotiated a price that seemed fair to both parties, and arrangements were made for Vince to collect the medical supplies the following morning. As the mountain man finally took his leave, Mr. Duncan watched him go with an approving expression. That's a good man, Duncan said. Quiet, keeps to himself, but honest. I have known him 3 years, and he has never once failed to keep his word. He seems honorable, Daisy agreed carefully. He is also unmarried, Duncan added with a knowing look. Just a fact I thought worth mentioning. Daisy felt her cheeks warm. I hardly think that is relevant to me, Mr. Duncan. No, I saw how you looked at each other, and how he looked at your hands with concern. Mark my words, girl, that man is interested. You are seeing things that are not there, Daisy insisted, but her heart was beating faster. The afternoon crawled by. Daisy found her mind wandering repeatedly to Vincent Harper, wondering where he was and what he was doing. It was foolish, she told herself. She had known the man for less than a day. He was leaving in 3 days, returning to his mountain isolation, and she would likely never see him again. There was no point in entertaining romantic notions. But when she lay in bed that night, it was his gray eyes she saw before sleep claimed her. The next 2 days followed a similar pattern. Vincent would come to the store under one pretext or another, making small purchases or asking questions that clearly did not require answers. Each visit lasted longer than the last, and their conversations grew more personal. Daisy learned that Vincent was 32 years old, originally from Montana, and had come to the California mountains after the death of his wife and infant daughter from fever. The grief had driven him to seek solitude, to escape the pity and questions of civilization. For 5 years he had lived alone, trapping, hunting, panning for gold, and finding peace in the harsh beauty of the wilderness. In turn, Daisy shared her own story. She was 24, born in Boston to Irish immigrants. Her mother had died when she was 10, and her father had spiraled into drunkenness. After his death 2 years ago, she had worked as a seamstress in a sweatshop, barely earning enough to survive. When the opportunity arose to travel west as part of a program seeking working women for frontier towns, she had seized it without hesitation. Anything was better than slow starvation in a city tenement. On the 3rd day, Vincent came to the store in the early morning, his supplies already packed and loaded on 2 sturdy mules. He looked every inch the mountain man now, prepared for the long journey ahead. His rifle was slung across his back, his knife at his belt, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone who knew he could handle whatever the wilderness threw at him. I came to say goodbye, he told Daisy, his voice quiet enough that Duncan, who was in the back room, could not hear. I will return in 3 months, perhaps 4, depending on the weather. I hope you have a safe journey, Daisy said, fighting against the unexpected tightness in her throat. Why did she feel such loss at the departure of someone she barely knew? Miss Renshaw, Vince said, then paused. Daisy, if I may be so bold, in 3 months would you be amenable to my calling on you properly, with the intention of courtship? Daisy's breath caught. She'd hoped in the secret corners of her heart, but had not allowed herself to expect. I would be very amenable to that, Mr. Harper. Vincent, he corrected gently. Please call me Vincent. Then you must call me Daisy. Daisy, he repeated, and the way he said her name made her shiver despite the morning heat. 3 months. I will count the days. He reached out and took her hand, careful of her healing knuckles, and raised it to his lips. The kiss was chaste, proper, but it sent warmth flooding through her entire body. Then he was gone, striding out into the morning sun, and Daisy watched through the store window until he disappeared from sight. The days that followed were both easier and harder. Easier because she no longer spent every moment watching the door, wondering if Vincent would appear. Harder because the town felt emptier without his presence, as if something vital had been removed. The trouble with Cyrus Blackwell and his saloon intensified. Twice more, men approached Daisy with offers that were barely veiled threats. She rebuffed them firmly, but she knew it was only a matter of time before Blackwell escalated his campaign. Men like him did not accept refusal gracefully. Then, 6 weeks after Vincent had left, something unexpected happened. Daisy was walking back to the boarding house after work when a woman stepped out of the shadows. She was perhaps 40, wearing a faded dress and a haunted expression. "You are the girl who works at Duncan's store," the woman said. It was not a question. "I am. May I help you?" "My name is Margaret Howell. I used to work at Blackwell's saloon until I got too old for his tastes." The bitterness in her voice was palpable. "I heard what happened in the alley 6 weeks back, how you fought those men off and the mountain man helped you." "What of it?" Daisy asked cautiously. "Blackwell is not done with you. He's been telling people you owe him money, that you stole from the store, and that is why you will not work for him. He's building a case to have you arrested." Daisy felt ice form in her stomach. "That is absolutely false. I have never stolen anything in my life." "I know that," Margaret said, "but truth does not matter when you have the sheriff in your pocket. Blackwell has been paying Sheriff Morton for years. If he wants you arrested, you will be arrested." "What can I do?" Daisy asked, hearing the desperation in her own voice. "Leave town," Margaret said bluntly. "Tonight if possible. Once you are in that jail, there will be no getting out except by becoming his property." "I have nowhere to go," Daisy whispered. The enormity of the situation was crashing down on her. "I have no money saved. I barely earn enough to pay for my room." Margaret pressed something into Daisy's hand. It was a small leather pouch, heavy with coins. "This is everything I managed to save. It is not much, but it will get you to the next town." "I cannot take this," Daisy protested, trying to return the pouch. "You can and you will," Margaret said firmly. "I have no use for it anymore. I'm dying, girl. Consumption. The doctor says I have maybe 3 months. I would rather my savings help someone than line Blackwell's pockets after I'm gone." She gripped Daisy's shoulders. "You remind me of myself 30 years ago, full of fire and determination. Do not let this place break you the way it broke me." Tears streamed down Daisy's face. "Thank you. I will never forget this kindness." "Go quickly," Margaret urged. "And if you ever see that mountain man again, hold on to him. Good men are rare treasures." Daisy hurried to the boarding house, her mind racing. She could leave tonight, catch the late train heading west toward Los Angeles. But something made her hesitate. Vincent had said 3 months. It had only been 6 weeks. He would return expecting to find her here, and she would be gone without explanation. The thought of him believing she had simply left, that she had not cared enough to wait, was unbearable. But staying risked arrest and a fate worse than anything she had fled in Boston. The decision was made for her the next morning when Sheriff Morton appeared at the store with 2 deputies. He was a heavy-set man with cold eyes and a badge that had long ago lost any association with justice. "Daisy Renshaw," he announced loudly enough for everyone in the store to hear. "You are under arrest for theft." "I have stolen nothing," Daisy said, her voice shaking despite her best efforts. "Mr. Blackwell says otherwise. He claims you took money from the poker tables when you cleaned his saloon last month." "I have never cleaned his saloon. I have never even been inside his establishment." "That is not what he says." Morton grabbed her arm roughly. "You can tell your lies to the judge." "When will that be?" Daisy demanded. "Judge comes through once a month. Should be here in about 3 weeks. 3 weeks in jail without charges being proven. 3 weeks for Blackwell to pressure her into submission." Daisy looked desperately at Mr. Duncan, who stood frozen behind the counter, clearly torn between self-preservation and conscience. "Sheriff Morton," Duncan said finally, his voice trembling slightly. "I have known this girl for months. She is honest and hard-working. I find these charges difficult to believe." "Are you calling Mr. Blackwell a liar?" Morton asked dangerously. Duncan paled. "No, of course not. I'm merely saying there may be a misunderstanding." "Then let the judge sort it out." Morton dragged Daisy toward the door. She did not resist. Fighting would only make things worse. But as they stepped out into the street, she heard Duncan's voice behind her. "I will send word to Vincent Harper. He should know what has happened." Morton paused. "What has the mountain man got to do with this?" "He's a friend of Miss Renshaw's. He would want to know." "That savage can mind his own business," Morton said, but Daisy detected a note of unease in his voice. Even corrupt sheriffs knew better than to anger a man like Vincent Harper unnecessarily. The jail was a small adobe building at the edge of town, with 2 cells separated by iron bars. One was occupied by a drunk miner sleeping off his binge. Daisy was locked in the other, the door clanging shut with terrible finality. The next 3 days were the longest of Daisy's life. She was given minimal food and water, and Morton made it clear that conditions could improve if she agreed to work for Blackwell. She refused every time, though her resolve was tested by hunger and the oppressive heat that turned the cell into an oven during the day. On the 4th day, Blackwell himself came to visit. He was a thin man with slicked back hair and a smile that never reached his eyes. He wore expensive clothes that looked out of place in Mojave and carried himself with the arrogance of someone who had never faced real consequences for his actions. "Miss Renshaw," he said, pulling up a chair to sit just outside her cell, "you are looking unwell. This is unfortunate and entirely unnecessary." "You fabricated charges against me," Daisy said flatly. "There's nothing more to discuss. I prefer to think of it as a business arrangement gone wrong. You see, I offered you employment, generous employment, and you refused. This hurt my feelings. It also hurt my reputation. People began to wonder why you would rather work for pittance at Duncan's store than enjoy the comforts I could provide." "Because I would rather starve than sell myself." Blackwell sighed as if she were a difficult child. "Such melodrama. The women who work for me are well compensated and protected. It is honest work, in its own way." "It is exploitation." "It is survival," Blackwell corrected, "and you will find, Miss Renshaw, that survival sometimes requires compromise. Now, I am prepared to make this situation disappear. The charges will be dropped, and you will be free to leave this unpleasant cell. All I require is your agreement to a contract. 3 months of work at my establishment, after which you will be free to leave with a tidy sum of money." "No. You have not thought this through. The judge will arrive in 2.5 weeks. He is a friend of mine. You will be convicted. The sentence for theft is 5 years of hard labor or a fine you cannot afford to pay. Either way, you will become property of the state, and the state has arrangements with businessmen like myself. You will end up working for me regardless. I am offering you a chance to do so with dignity intact." Daisy wanted to scream, to rage against the injustice, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I will take my chances with the judge." "Your funeral," Blackwell said, standing, "or rather, your ruin. Think on my offer, Miss Renshaw. It remains open for another week." After he left, Daisy allowed herself to cry. Not from fear, though fear was certainly present, but from frustration at her own powerlessness. She had fought so hard to build a life here, and in a moment it had all been stripped away by the greed and cruelty of men who saw her as nothing more than a commodity. That night, lying on the thin mattress in her cell, Daisy thought of Vincent Harper. Was he even now receiving word of her arrest? Would he care enough to come? And even if he did, what could one man do against a corrupt sheriff and a judge in Blackwell's pocket? She tried not to hope. Hope, she had learned, was dangerous. It left you vulnerable to deeper disappointment. But as she drifted into uneasy sleep, she dreamed of gray eyes and gentle strength, of a voice promising that she would never be alone again. 8 days after her arrest, on a scorching afternoon when the heat made the air shimmer like water, the door to the jail opened. Daisy looked up from where she sat on her cot, expecting Morton or another visit from Blackwell. Instead, she saw Vincent Harper. He looked as if he had ridden hard and fast. Dust covered his clothes, and his face was drawn with exhaustion, but his eyes blazed with barely controlled fury. He took in the sight of her in the cell, the bruise on her cheek where a deputy had struck her for talking back, and something dangerous passed across his features. "Daisy," he said, his voice tight. "Vincent." She stood and moved to the bars. "You came." "Duncan sent word. I rode for 3 days straight." He turned to Morton, who had followed him into the jail. "What are the charges?" "Theft," Morton said, trying to project authority, but succeeding only in looking nervous. "She stole from Mr. Blackwell's establishment." "That's a lie," Vincent said flatly. "That is for the judge to decide." "Then post her bail. I will pay whatever is required." "There is no bail for theft in this jurisdiction," Morton said, and Daisy could see the satisfaction in his eyes. "She waits for the judge." Vincent's hands clenched into fists. "You and I both know this is not about justice. Blackwell wants her, and you are helping him." "Mind your accusations, Harper. I could arrest you for interfering with the law." "You could try," Vincent said, and the quiet menace in his voice made Morton take an involuntary step back. "But that would be unwise." For a long moment, the two men stared at each other. Then Morton seemed to deflate slightly. "Look, I am just doing my job. If you have a problem with the situation, take it up with Blackwell." "I intend to." Vincent turned back to Daisy. "Hold on, I will fix this." "Vincent, please be careful," Daisy said. "Blackwell is dangerous. He has people in his pocket." "So do I," Vincent said cryptically. "Trust me." He left, and Daisy felt simultaneously better and worse. Better because Vincent was here, because he had cared enough to come. Worse, because she feared what might happen if he confronted Blackwell directly. This was not the wilderness where strength and skill were enough. This was civilization, such as it was, where money and corruption held more power than any honest man's fists. Vincent went directly to the saloon. It was mid-afternoon, and the establishment was relatively quiet, with only a handful of patrons nursing drinks. Blackwell was at his usual table in the back, playing cards with 2 men Vincent recognized as claim owners from the nearby mines. "Mr. Harper," Blackwell said with false warmth, "I had heard you were in town. Come to enjoy our hospitality?" "I have come to discuss Daisy Renshaw," Vincent said without preamble. Blackwell's smile thinned. "Ah, yes, the unfortunate thief. What business is she of yours?" "She's not a thief, and we both know it. Drop the charges." "I am afraid I cannot do that. She stole from me. Justice must be served." Vincent placed both hands on the table and leaned forward, his size making the threat implicit. "Name your price. Whatever you think you will gain from her imprisonment, I will pay double." "This is not about money," Blackwell said, though everyone in the room knew that was a lie. "This is about principle. One cannot simply steal and expect no consequences." $100, Vincent said. "Gold." The room went silent. $100 in gold was a fortune, more than most men in Mojave would see in a year. Blackwell's eyes widened slightly before he controlled his expression. "That is a generous offer for someone claiming innocence. Perhaps you know something of her guilt after all." "I know she is innocent. I also know you will not drop the charges for anything less, so I am offering you a choice, $100 in gold, or you make an enemy of me." "Are you threatening me, Mr. Harper?" "I am stating facts. You have 3 days to consider my offer. After that, I will take matters into my own hands. The law would not look kindly on vigilante justice." "The law," Vincent said coldly, "stopped existing in this town when you bought the sheriff. Do not pretend you are on the side of righteousness, Blackwell. We both know what you are." He straightened and walked out of the saloon, leaving Blackwell staring after him with an expression that mixed calculation with unease. Vincent spent the next 2 days making preparations. He visited the mining camps outside town, speaking with men he had traded with over the years. He talked to Duncan, to the blacksmith, to the doctor, to anyone who might have influence or information. What he learned confirmed his suspicions. Blackwell's corruption was widely known but tolerated because he provided entertainment and women to miners hungry for both. Morton was his creature, and the judge, when he came, would rule however Blackwell wished. Legal channels would not free Daisy. That left illegal ones. On the 3rd day, Vincent returned to the jail. It was late evening, the sun having just set and the desert cooling rapidly. Morton was at his desk, working through a stack of wanted posters. "Harper," the sheriff said without looking up, "come to make more threats?" "I have come to give you a warning. What happens next is your choice. Vincent laid a leather pouch on the desk. The clink of coins was unmistakable. That is $50. Take it, release Miss Renshaw into my custody and leave town by morning. Or stay, face the consequences, and watch your comfortable arrangement with Blackwell crumble. Morton finally looked up. You are insane if you think I will be bribed so easily. I am not bribing you. I am offering you an escape route. Vincent leaned against the desk. I spent the last 2 days talking to people. Did you know there's a federal marshal scheduled to pass through next month? His name is James Cartwright, and he is known for rooting out corruption in frontier towns. I have written him a letter detailing your arrangement with Blackwell. If anything happens to me or Miss Renshaw, that letter will be delivered. The color drained from Morton's face. You are bluffing. Am I? You know my reputation. Have I ever been known to bluff? Vincent pushed the pouch closer. $50 and a head start. That is more than fair. Blackwell will kill me if I run. Blackwell will be dealing with his own problems soon enough. The mine owners are tired of his monopoly on entertainment. They are talking about funding a competitor. Without their support, his influence in this town will evaporate. Vincent straightened. You have until sunrise to decide. After that, the offer expires, and you are on your own. He left Morton staring at the pouch, as if it were a snake about to strike. Vincent knew his plan was risky, built on bluffs and half-truths. There was no federal marshal coming, at least not that he knew of. But Morton did not know that, and fear was a powerful motivator for a man whose entire life was built on a foundation of corruption. He spent the night in his hotel room, his Henry rifle loaded and within easy reach, half expecting Morton to attempt something stupid. But the night passed quietly, and when dawn broke over Mojave, Vincent allowed himself to hope. He was at the jail by 7 in the morning. Morton looked as if he had not slept, his eyes red-rimmed and his hands shaking slightly. The leather pouch was gone from the desk. You win, Harper, Morton said bitterly, but you are making a mistake. Blackwell will not let this stand. Blackwell will learn to live with disappointment. Vincent gestured toward the cells. Release her. Morton unlocked Daisy's cell. She emerged, blinking in the morning light, thinner than when Vincent had last seen her, but unbroken. Her eyes found his, and the relief in them made his chest tighten. Can I really leave? She asked, as if afraid to believe. You can, Vincent confirmed. The charges have been dropped due to lack of evidence. That is not exactly how I would phrase it, Morton muttered, but he was already gathering papers from his desk, preparing for flight. Outside the jail, Daisy finally allowed herself to breathe freely. The morning air was cool and sweet, and the simple act of standing in the sun without bars surrounding her felt like a miracle. How did you manage it? She asked Vincent. It is better you do not know the details, he said, but you are free, and that is what matters. What happens now? Blackwell will not simply accept defeat. No, Vincent agreed, which is why you are leaving town, today, this morning if possible. Daisy's heart sank. Where will I go? With me. He said it simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. To my cabin in the mountains. You will be safe there. I cannot ask you to do that. You barely know me. Vincent turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. I know enough. I know you are brave. I know you fight for yourself when others would crumble. I know that in the short time I have known you, you have occupied my thoughts more than anyone has in 5 years. I know that when Duncan's message reached me, telling me you were in danger, I did not hesitate. I rode for 3 days straight because the thought of you suffering was unbearable. Vincent, Daisy whispered, tears pricking her eyes. You fought 3 drunks alone in that alley, he continued, and I said to myself, this woman should never have to fight alone again. If you will trust me, if you will come with me, I swear I will spend every day proving that promise true. I trust you, Daisy said. I have from the moment you stepped into that alley. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his face from stern to almost boyish. Then let us collect your things and leave before Blackwell wakes up and causes trouble. They went to the boarding house where Widow Patterson had Daisy's meager belongings already packed. The older woman had heard about the arrest and the release, and she pressed a package of food into Daisy's hands. Go quickly, girl, she advised, and may God watch over you both. At Duncan's store, Mr. Duncan was already opening up for the day. He saw them approaching and nodded with satisfaction. I knew Harper would sort things out. He is that kind of man. Thank you for sending word to him, Daisy said. I owe you my life, quite possibly. Nonsense. I simply did what was right, which is more than most in this town can claim. He pulled out a small ledger. I owe you wages for the days you were imprisoned. It is not much, but it is yours. Keep it, Daisy said. You took a risk standing up to Morton. That is payment enough. Then take this. Duncan handed her a small package. Provisions for the journey. And Harper, you watch out for this girl. She is special. I know, Vincent said quietly. I intend to. They left Mojave as the sun climbed higher, Vincent on his horse and Daisy on one of the mules, the other mule carrying supplies. As they rode out of town, Daisy looked back once at the dusty streets and false-fronted buildings. She felt no regret at leaving. This place had offered her nothing but hardship. The mountains ahead, purple and imposing against the morning sky, represented uncertainty. But with Vincent riding beside her, uncertainty felt less like a threat and more like promise. They rode through the long day, following trails that became progressively less defined as they climbed into the foothills. Vincent set a steady pace, not pushing too hard, but clearly eager to put distance between them and Mojave. They stopped once at midday to water the animals and rest briefly, but otherwise kept moving. As they traveled, Vincent pointed out landmarks and features of the landscape. A spring hidden among rocks where water ran cold and sweet, a stand of Joshua trees that provided shade during the hottest part of the day, a rock formation that looked like a sleeping giant. You love it here, Daisy observed. I do, Vincent admitted. These mountains saved me when I thought I could not be saved. After I lost Mary and little Sarah, I wanted to die. I went into the wilderness thinking nature would finish me off. Instead, it gave me a reason to keep living. Tell me about them, Daisy said gently, if you want to. Vincent was quiet for a long moment, and Daisy thought he would not answer. Then he began to speak, his voice low and measured. Mary was my childhood sweetheart. We married young, maybe too young. She wanted a house full of children, a warm home. I wanted adventure, to see the frontier. We compromised by settling in a mining town in Montana. It was not what either of us truly wanted, but we were together, and that was enough. He paused to navigate around a rocky outcropping before continuing. Sarah was born in winter. She had Mary's red hair in my eyes. She was perfect. For 3 months I thought I had everything a man could want. Then the fever came. It swept through the town, killing dozens. Mary and Sarah were among them. I'm so sorry, Daisy said softly. I buried them in the spring when the ground thawed enough to dig graves. Then I sold everything I owned and came south. I told myself I was looking for gold, for a fresh start, but really I was looking for oblivion. I found these mountains instead. They were harsh enough to match my mood, beautiful enough to slowly thaw the ice around my heart. Do you think Mary would want you to be happy again? I think she would want me to live, not merely survive. There is a difference. He glanced at Daisy. These past few months since meeting you, I have remembered what living feels like. They made camp that evening in a small valley where a stream provided fresh water and enough grass for the animals. Vincent set up a simple camp with practiced efficiency, building a small fire and preparing a meal of beans and salt pork. As darkness fell and the temperature dropped, they sat close to the fire, shoulders almost touching. I have not thanked you properly, Daisy said, for everything you have done. You fought 3 drunks alone in an alley, Vincent said, echoing his earlier words. You did not need rescuing then, and you did not need it in that jail. You would have found a way. I'm not so sure about that. Blackwell had me trapped. But you never gave in. That is what matters. That is what tells me who you truly are. Daisy shifted closer, drawn by warmth and something deeper. Who am I, Vincent? Stronger than you know, braver than most men I have met, and beautiful in ways that have nothing to do with your face, though that is lovely too. She laughed, a sound that held both embarrassment and pleasure. You're quite the romantic for a mountain man. My mother read poetry to me as a child. I suppose some of it stuck. He reached out and tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear, his rough fingers gentle. May I kiss you, Daisy? Yes, she breathed. His kiss was soft, almost tentative, as if he feared she might break. Daisy leaned into it, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. She could feel the solid muscle beneath his shirt, the steady beat of his heart. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing harder. "I have wanted to do that since I first saw you in that alley," Vincent admitted. "I have wanted you to," Daisy confessed, though I told myself it was foolish to hope. "It is not foolish. I meant what I said before. I want to court you properly, to give you the time to know me and decide if this is what you want. But I will not lie and pretend I am not already half in love with you." "Only half," Daisy teased, though her heart was soaring. "I am trying to be a gentleman and not overwhelm you with the full extent of my feelings after such a short acquaintance." "Perhaps I would like to be overwhelmed." Vincent's eyes darkened with desire, but he shook his head. "Not yet. You have been through a trauma. You need time to heal, to feel safe again. I will not take advantage of vulnerability, even willing vulnerability." Daisy knew he was right, though part of her wanted to protest. "You are a good man, Vincent Harper." "I am a man trying to be worthy of you," he corrected. They sat together by the fire, talking until the flames died down to embers and the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. Daisy told Vincent about her childhood in Boston, about the hunger and cold that were constant companions. Vincent spoke of his parents, both deceased now, and his 3 brothers scattered across the Western territories. When exhaustion finally claimed them, Vincent laid out bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire, maintaining propriety even here in the wilderness where no one would know or judge. But before Daisy settled into her blankets, Vincent touched her cheek gently. "Never alone again," he said. "I meant that." "I know," Daisy replied, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt truly safe. The next day's ride was more challenging as they climbed higher into the mountains. The trail became steep and rocky, requiring careful navigation. Vincent led the way, occasionally dismounting to move obstacles or find safer routes. Daisy marveled at his competence, the way he moved through this harsh landscape, as if born to it. They reached his cabin in late afternoon. It was larger than Daisy had expected, built of solid logs with a stone chimney and real glass windows. A covered porch wrapped around 2 sides, and behind the cabin she could see a sturdy shed and a corral. "You built this?" she asked, impressed. "Over the course of 3 years," Vincent said with obvious pride. "I wanted something permanent, not just a temporary shelter. The winters here are brutal. Poor construction means death." Inside, the cabin was surprisingly comfortable. A large main room served as kitchen and living space, with a massive fireplace dominating one wall. Shelves lined with books and supplies covered another. A door led to what Daisy assumed was a bedroom, and a ladder reached up to a loft space. "You will have the bedroom," Vincent said, anticipating her question. "I will sleep in the loft. I do not want to displace you from your own bed." "You are not displacing me. You are honoring me with your presence." He set her bag near the bedroom door. "Take your time settling in. I need to tend to the animals and check my traps." Alone in the cabin, Daisy explored her new surroundings. The bedroom was simple but clean, with a real bed frame and mattress, a washstand, and a chest of drawers. She opened the drawers and found them empty, ready for her use. The thoughtfulness of this touched her deeply. Through the window, she could see Vincent working in the corral, moving with purposeful efficiency. His shirt strained across his shoulders as he hauled water and fodder, and Daisy found herself admiring the play of muscle beneath fabric. She had never considered herself a particularly sensual person, but something about this man awakened feelings she had not known she possessed. That evening, Vincent prepared a meal that surprised Daisy with its quality. Venison steaks, potatoes roasted in the coals, and even fresh greens from a small garden he maintained behind the cabin. They ate by lamplight, the windows showing only darkness beyond. "How do you manage here alone through the winter?" Daisy asked. "Carefully," Vincent said with a slight smile. "I spend the fall hunting and preserving meat. I have a root cellar stocked with vegetables and dried goods. The stream provides water even when frozen, and I keep cords of wood stacked and ready. It is isolating, but not unbearable." "Do you ever get lonely?" "Every day," he admitted. "But loneliness is preferable to the false company of people who pity you or want something from you. At least it was. Now I think that might change." Over the following days, they settled into a routine. Vincent continued his work of trapping and hunting, while Daisy explored the cabin and its surroundings. She discovered his extensive library and spent happy hours reading by the fireplace. She also took over the cooking, not because Vincent expected it, but because she wanted to contribute. They talked endlessly, learning each other's stories, habits, and dreams. Vincent taught her to fish in the stream and to recognize edible plants. Daisy shared her knowledge of sewing and mending, repairing his clothes that had been crudely patched. At night, they sat together on the porch, watching the stars and listening to the sounds of the wilderness. Sometimes, Vincent would read aloud from one of his books, his deep voice turning poetry into music. Other times, they simply enjoyed the comfortable silence that only true companionship can provide. 3 weeks into her stay, Daisy woke to find Vincent gone from the cabin. A note on the table explained he had gone to check his trap lines and would return by evening. She spent the day tidying the cabin, doing laundry in the stream, and attempting to bake bread with mixed results. When Vincent returned, he was carrying something wrapped in burlap. He set it carefully on the table and gestured for Daisy to open it. Inside was a dress, simple but new, in a deep blue that matched her eyes. "I had this made in Mojave before I left," Vincent explained, looking almost bashful. "I wanted you to have something that was yours, not borrowed or makeshift." Daisy held up the dress, tears streaming down her face. No one had ever given her something so thoughtful, so personal. "Vincent, this is too much." "It is not enough," he countered. "You deserve beautiful things, Daisy. You deserve to feel valued and cherished." She set down the dress and crossed to him, taking his hands. "I do feel valued. Every moment I am with you, I feel treasured in ways I never imagined possible." "Daisy," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "these weeks with you have been the happiest of my life since I lost my family. Having you here, hearing your voice, seeing your smile, it has transformed this cabin from a shelter into a home. I know it is soon, perhaps too soon, but I need you to know my intentions are honorable and serious. I want you to stay, not just for the winter, but always. I want to marry you if you will have me." Daisy's heart felt too large for her chest. "Are you proposing to me, Vincent Harper?" "I am, though I realize I'm doing it badly. You deserve better. Deserve romance and courtship in time. But I cannot hold back what I feel any longer. I love you, Daisy Renshaw. I love your courage and your kindness and the way you hum when you cook. I love how you look at the mountains as if they hold secrets. I love everything about you, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that love to you." "Yes," Daisy said simply. "Yes, I will marry you." Vincent swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. His laughter was pure joy, the sound of a man who had rediscovered hope. When he set her down, he kissed her deeply, and Daisy felt the last walls around her heart crumble. "We will need to go back down to a town with a proper preacher," Vincent said when they finally pulled apart. "I want this done right, legal and binding." "There is a mission in the next valley," Daisy said, remembering something he had mentioned. "Did you not say they have a priest who comes through regularly?" "Father Domingo, yes. He is due in about 2 weeks. We could ride there." Vincent cupped her face in his hands. "Are you sure about this? Once we are married, you will be bound to this life, to these mountains. It is not an easy existence." "I am more sure of this than I have ever been of anything," Daisy said firmly. "You say I fought 3 drunks alone in that alley, but the truth is I have been fighting alone my entire life. You offered me something I never thought I would have, a true partner, someone who sees me as an equal, someone who values me for who I am rather than what I can provide. I would be a fool to turn away from that." "Then we will marry in 2 weeks," Vincent declared, "and I will spend every day of our marriage making sure you never regret this choice." The following 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation and growing anticipation. Vincent hunted extra game to smoke and preserve, ensuring they would have ample supplies for the winter ahead. Daisy sewed herself a simple white dress from fabric Vincent had stored away, working by lamplight and dreaming of her wedding day. They continued to maintain propriety, sleeping in separate areas, though the kisses they shared grew progressively more passionate. Vincent's restraint was admirable, but tested daily by their proximity and mutual desire. On the morning they were to ride to the mission, Daisy woke early and donned her new blue dress. She had washed her hair the night before, and it fell in soft waves past her shoulders. Looking at her reflection in the small mirror, She barely recognized herself. The hunted woman who had fought in that alley was gone, replaced by someone who glowed with happiness and hope. Vincent was waiting outside, having saddled both horses and packed supplies for the journey. When he saw her, he stopped mid-motion, simply staring. "You are breathtaking," he said finally. "You're quite handsome yourself," Daisy replied, noting that he had trimmed his beard and wore his best shirt. The ride to the mission took most of the day, following mountain trails that switchbacked through pine forests and across flower-dotted meadows. The mission itself was a modest adobe structure nestled in a valley where a handful of Mexican families maintained farms. Father Domingo, a jovial man in his 60s, greeted them warmly. "Vincent Harper," he said, his English accented but clear. "It has been many months since you darkened my door. And who is this lovely lady?" "This is Daisy Renshaw," Vincent said, "my betrothed. We have come to ask if you would marry us." Father Domingo's eyebrows rose. "You? Married? I had thought you married to solitude, my friend. But yes, of course I will perform the ceremony. When were you thinking?" "Tomorrow, if possible," Vincent said. "I know it is rushed, but circumstances have been complicated. Tomorrow is Sunday. We will have Mass and afterward a wedding. It will be good for the community to celebrate such a joyous occasion." Father Domingo turned to Daisy. "You are certain this is what you want, child? Mountain life is hard, and Vincent, though a good man, is not easy to live with, I think." "I am certain, Father," Daisy said. "I have never been more certain of anything." "Then tomorrow it is. Tonight you will be my guests. Separate rooms, of course," he added with a knowing smile. "We must maintain propriety until the vows are spoken." That night, Daisy lay in the small guest room, listening to the sounds of the mission settling into sleep. Tomorrow she would become Vincent's wife. The thought filled her with both excitement and a flutter of nerves. She had never been with a man, had never shared that intimacy. She trusted Vincent completely, but the unknown was still daunting. A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. "Daisy, may I speak with you?" She opened the door to find Vincent standing in the hallway, his hair loose around his shoulders. "Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong. I simply wanted to tell you something before tomorrow." He took her hands. "I know you might be nervous about the physical aspects of marriage. I want you to know that we will move at whatever pace you are comfortable with. There is no rush. I will never pressure you or make you feel obligated." Daisy felt a rush of love for this considerate man. "Thank you for understanding. I also want you to know that you can change your mind. If you wake tomorrow and realize this is not what you want, I will not hold you to anything. Your happiness is more important than my desires." "I will not change my mind," Daisy said firmly. "Now go back to your room before Father Domingo catches us and lectures us about propriety." Vincent grinned and kissed her forehead. "Good night, my love." "Good night, Vincent." The wedding took place after Sunday Mass in the mission's small chapel. The local families, delighted by the unexpected celebration, filled the pews. Daisy wore her white dress with wildflowers woven into her hair, placed there by the local women who had adopted her for the morning. Vincent stood at the altar in clean clothes, his hair tied back, looking both nervous and joyful. Father Domingo performed the ceremony in both English and Spanish, blessing their union and speaking of the sanctity of marriage. When the moment came to exchange vows, Vincent's voice was strong and clear. "I, Vincent Harper, take you, Daisy Renshaw, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, protect you, and cherish you for all the days of my life, in joy and in sorrow, in plenty and in want, in sickness and in health. I will stand beside you. You will never be alone again." Daisy's voice trembled slightly but held firm. "I, Daisy Renshaw, take you, Vincent Harper, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, honor you, support you, and cherish you for all the days of my life, in joy and in sorrow, in plenty and in want, in sickness and in health. I will stand beside you. Together we are stronger than apart." Father Domingo blessed their union, and Vincent kissed his bride to enthusiastic applause from the congregation. The families insisted on hosting a celebration with food and music and dancing. It was a far cry from the elaborate society weddings Daisy had occasionally glimpsed in Boston, but it was infinitely more meaningful. As the sun set and the party continued around them, Vincent pulled Daisy aside. "Are you happy?" "Happier than I ever thought possible," she said honestly. "This has been perfect." "It is only the beginning," Vincent promised. "We have a lifetime ahead of us." They left the mission the next morning amid warm farewells and good wishes. The ride back to the cabin felt different now. They were no longer simply two people sharing space, but husband and wife, bound together by vows and love. That first night as a married couple, Vincent was true to his word. He was gentle and patient, taking his time to ensure Daisy felt safe and cherished. There was awkwardness, certainly, as there always is with new intimacy. But there was also tenderness and growing passion. When they finally came together completely, it felt like the natural culmination of everything that had built between them. Afterward, lying in Vincent's arms in the bed they now shared, Daisy felt a profound sense of belonging. This was where she was meant to be. This man, this place, this life was her destiny. "What are you thinking?" Vincent asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "That I fought 3 drunks alone in an alley and it led me here. To you, to happiness. Sometimes the hardest moments lead to the best outcomes." "You were never truly alone," Vincent said. "I was there, and now I will always be there. No more fighting alone, Daisy. We face everything together now." "Together," Daisy agreed, and sealed the promise with a kiss. The months that followed were a revelation. As summer faded into autumn and autumn into winter, Daisy discovered a life she had never imagined possible. The work was hard, certainly. There were animals to tend, food to preserve, wood to chop, and 1,000 other tasks required for survival in the mountains. But she embraced it all, finding satisfaction in the physical labor and the tangible results. Vincent proved to be not just a loving husband, but also a considerate partner. He taught her to shoot, patiently correcting her stance until she could reliably hit targets. He showed her how to read the weather in the clouds and the behavior of animals. He shared his knowledge freely, treating her as an equal rather than a subordinate. In turn, Daisy brought her own skills to their partnership. She was better at planning and organization, creating systems that made their daily work more efficient. Her sewing skills meant they had well-repaired clothes and even some small luxuries like curtains for the windows. Her cooking improved with practice, and she learned to make delicious meals from the simple ingredients available to them. But more than the practical aspects, they simply enjoyed each other. Long winter evenings were spent reading aloud, playing cards, or simply talking. They laughed together, argued occasionally, and always made up before sleeping. Vincent's nightmares about his first family gradually decreased, soothed by Daisy's presence. Daisy's own trauma from Mojave faded as she realized she was truly safe, truly valued. Spring came with a rush of melting snow and bursting greenery. As the trails became passable again, Vincent prepared for one of his supply runs to a trading post 2 days' ride away. Daisy insisted on coming with him, curious to see more of the territory and reluctant to be parted from her husband even for a few days. At the trading post, a rough collection of buildings clustered around a fortified central structure, they encountered other trappers and mountain men. Several knew Vincent and were surprised to see him with a wife. The attention made Daisy uncomfortable until Vincent made it clear she was under his protection. After that, the men were respectful, even friendly. They also heard news from the wider world. There had been trouble with a gang of outlaws operating between California and Nevada, robbing travelers in small settlements. Several lawmen were hunting them, but the gang remained elusive. "Just be careful on the trails," the trading post owner advised. "These men are dangerous and desperate." On their return journey, Vincent kept his rifle close and his senses alert. They saw no trouble, however, and reached the cabin safely. Still, the news had been a reminder that danger existed even in their mountain sanctuary. As spring turned to summer, Daisy began to notice changes in her body. Her monthly courses, always regular, failed to arrive. She felt tired more easily and queasy in the mornings. It took her a few weeks to admit what her body was already telling her. She was pregnant. She chose to reveal the news on a particularly beautiful evening when they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset. "Vincent, I have something to tell you." He looked at her, immediately attentive to the serious tone in her voice. "What is it? Are you unwell?" "Not unwell, no, but there is going to be a change in our lives." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. I'm carrying your child." For a moment, Vincent simply stared at her hand covering his on her belly. Then his eyes filled with tears, and he pulled her into a fierce embrace. "A child. We are going to have a child." "Are you happy?" Daisy asked, though she could feel the answer in the way he held her. "Happy does not begin to cover what I feel." He pulled back to look at her face. "I am terrified. I am joyful. I'm grateful. I'm 100 things at once, but most of all, I am honored that you are giving me this gift." "We are giving this gift to each other," Daisy corrected. "A family, Vincent. Our family." That night they talked long into the darkness about their hopes and fears. Vincent confessed his terror that something might happen to Daisy or the baby, that history might repeat itself. Daisy admitted her own fear of childbirth, particularly so far from medical help. But they also spoke of joy, of a child running through the meadows, of teaching and nurturing and love. "We will get through this together," Daisy said, "just as we get through everything." "Together," Vincent agreed. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer. Daisy suffered morning sickness for a few weeks, but otherwise felt healthy and strong. Vincent became almost comically protective, insisting she avoid heavy work and rest frequently. Daisy tolerated his concern with good humor, understanding it came from love and old trauma. As autumn arrived again, and Daisy's belly grew round with child, they began preparing in earnest. Vincent crafted a cradle from smooth pine, carving it with care and attention to detail. Daisy sewed tiny clothes and blankets, marveling at the miniature scale. They discussed names endlessly, wanting to choose something meaningful. In early October, when the aspens were turning gold and the air carried the first hints of winter, Daisy went into labor. It began as mild cramping in the early morning and progressed slowly throughout the day. By evening, the contractions were strong and regular. Vincent had arranged for a midwife from the mission to come stay with them for the last month of Daisy's pregnancy. Maria was an experienced woman who had delivered hundreds of babies. Her calm competence was a steadying presence as the labor intensified. Through the long night, Vincent stayed by Daisy's side, holding her hand and supporting her through each contraction. She had never experienced pain like this, waves of agony that seemed endless. But Vincent's steady presence gave her strength. "You can do this," he murmured during a particularly difficult contraction. "You are the strongest person I know. You fought 3 drunks in an alley. You can fight through this." "That was easier," Daisy gasped, but she managed a weak smile. Dawn was breaking when Maria finally announced that it was time to push. The final stage of labor seemed to last forever, but eventually, Daisy heard the most beautiful sound in the world, her baby's first cry. "A son," Maria announced, placing the squalling infant on Daisy's chest. "A healthy, strong son." Daisy looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled and absolutely perfect. Vincent leaned over them both, his expression one of wonder and love so profound it made Daisy's heart ache. "He is beautiful," Vincent whispered. "You are amazing. Thank you." They named him Samuel Vincent Harper, Samuel after Daisy's father in his better days, and Vincent for the man who had proven that good fathers existed. Little Sam, as they quickly began calling him, was a good baby, healthy and alert. Vincent was a devoted father, changing diapers without complaint and walking the floors during fussy nights. Watching him with their son, Daisy fell even more deeply in love with her husband. Winter came, and with it, the isolation they had expected. But it did not feel lonely. Their small family was complete and happy. The cabin echoed with Sam's coos and gurgles, and later with his laughter. Vincent sang to him, old songs his own father had sung, and Daisy told stories as she nursed him. One evening, when Sam was 6 months old and sleeping peacefully in his cradle, Daisy and Vincent sat by the fire, her head resting on his shoulder. "Do you ever regret it?" Vincent asked, "giving up the possibility of town life, of society and conveniences?" "Never," Daisy said firmly. "Everything I need is right here. You, Sam, this life we have built. I have a partner who respects me, a child who brings joy, and a home where I feel safe and valued. What more could I possibly want?" "I want to give you the world," Vincent said. "You already have. My world is not measured in fancy dresses or social gatherings. It is measured in mornings waking next to you, evenings watching our son sleep, and days working side by side. It is measured in feeling for the first time in my life that I truly belong somewhere." Vincent kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Daisy Harper." "I love you too, Vincent, more than words can express." The years that followed were full and rich. Sam grew into a sturdy toddler and then a curious child, learning the ways of the mountains from his father and the wisdom of resilience from his mother. 2 years after Sam's birth, Daisy delivered a daughter they named Rose Mary, Mary for Vincent's first wife, honoring her memory while creating new joy. Rose was followed 3 years later by another son, Thomas, called Tommy, who seemed to have inherited his mother's fierce determination from birth. The cabin expanded with the growing family. Vincent added another bedroom and enlarged the loft, creating space for their children. The corral grew to accommodate more animals. The garden expanded to feed more mouths. Their life evolved and adapted, always centered on love and mutual support. Vincent still made occasional trips to trading posts for supplies, now sometimes accompanied by Daisy when the children were old enough to leave with Maria, who had become a frequent visitor and beloved figure to their family. They heard news of the outside world, the railroad expanding, towns growing, the slow civilizing of the frontier. But these changes felt distant and largely irrelevant to their mountain life. On a particularly memorable trip when Sam was 8, Rose was 6, and Tommy was 3, the family traveled together to a larger town for supplies. It was the children's first experience with any settlement beyond the mission, and their wide-eyed wonder at the stores and people delighted their parents. As they walked down the main street, Daisy suddenly stopped. There, standing outside a saloon, was one of the men from that alley in Mojave all those years ago. He had aged badly, his face more weathered, and his eyes harder, but she recognized the scar running down his cheek. The man saw her at the same moment. Recognition flickered across his face, followed by wariness. He glanced at Vincent, now even more imposing with years of mountain life, adding to his already formidable build, and whatever thoughts of confrontation he might have entertained died quickly. "Madam," he said shortly, tipping his hat and moving quickly past. Vincent had noticed the exchange. "Someone you know?" "Someone from my past," Daisy said. "No one who matters anymore." But the encounter had rattled her more than she wanted to admit. That night, in the hotel where they were staying, she confessed her unease to Vincent. "What if he tells Blackwell we are here? What if they try to cause trouble?" Vincent pulled her close. "Blackwell has no power outside Mojave, and even there, I doubt he wields the influence he once did. But if anyone tries to threaten you or our family, they will have to go through me first, and I am much harder to move than I was 8 years ago." "I know, but still, I worry. Do you remember what I told you that first day in the alley? Never alone again. That promise extends to our children now. We protect each other, Daisy. That is what family means." His words soothed her fears, and the next day, they left the town without incident. As they rode back toward their mountains, Sam and Rose chattering excitedly about everything they had seen, Daisy realized how much she had changed from the frightened woman in that alley. She was stronger now, not because danger no longer existed, but because she knew she did not face it alone. More years passed, marked by the rhythms of seasons and the growing of children. Sam developed his father's love of the wilderness, learning to track and hunt with keen interest. Rose showed an artistic temperament, drawing and painting with whatever materials she could find. Tommy was the most bookish, devouring every book in their growing library and asking questions about everything. Vincent's hair began to show threads of gray, and Daisy found her own auburn hair fading slightly. But they aged gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year rather than fading. They still stole kisses when the children were not watching, still shared long conversations on the porch after the children slept, still reached for each other in the night. When Sam turned 18, a strong young man with his father's build and his mother's determination, he announced his intention to strike out on his own. He wanted to explore, to see what lay beyond their mountains before deciding where to settle. The announcement hit both parents hard, but they understood. They had both left their own families, after all, seeking their own paths. "You will always have a home here," Vincent told his son. "No matter where you go or what you do, you can always come back." "I know, Pa," Sam said, "but I need to see what is out there. I need to know if I want the mountain life or something else." "Then go with our blessing," Daisy said, though her heart ached. "But be safe, and write when you can." Sam left on a spring morning, his pack filled with supplies and his parents' blessings. Rose cried, and Tommy tried to be stoic but failed. Vincent and Daisy watched their eldest son disappear down the trail, and Daisy felt Vincent's hand tighten on hers. "It never gets easier letting them go," he said quietly. "No, but we raised him to be independent and capable. We have to trust we gave him what he needs." Sam did return 6 months later with a young woman named Emma. She was a teacher from a town in Nevada, practical and kind, and Sam was clearly smitten. They married the following spring at the mission, with Father Domingo officiating again, older and grayer, but still jolly. Sam and Emma settled in a valley 2 days' ride from Vincent and Daisy's cabin, close enough to visit regularly but far enough to establish their own independence. Rose, when her time came, chose differently. She wanted to study art, to go to San Francisco and learn from proper teachers. Vincent and Daisy arranged for her to stay with Vincent's brother, who had settled there and built a successful business. It was harder letting Rose go so far, but they respected her dreams. She wrote regularly, her letters filled with descriptions of her studies and the vibrant city life. She never married, instead becoming a respected artist whose paintings of mountain landscapes earned her modest fame. Tommy, true to his bookish nature, eventually became a teacher, founding a small school in the growing town near the trading post. He married a widow with 2 children of her own, and their home was always filled with noise and learning and love. As their children built their own lives, Vincent and Daisy found themselves back where they started, just the 2 of them in their mountain cabin. But it was different now. The cabin held memories of laughter and tears, of scraped knees and school lessons, of Christmases and birthdays and ordinary days made special by love. "Do you ever regret not having a quieter life?" Daisy asked one evening when they were both in their 50s, sitting on their porch watching the sunset as they had done thousands of times before. "Never," Vincent said. "Every moment has been worth it. The hard times and the easy times, the worry and the joy, all of it, because I got to experience it with you." "We have been blessed," Daisy agreed. "I think of that girl in the alley sometimes, so scared and alone. I wish I could tell her it all works out, that fighting alone that night would lead to never being alone again." "You were so fierce," Vincent remembered, "standing there with blood on your knuckles, refusing to back down. I knew in that moment you were someone special. And you were my rescuer, who insisted I did not need rescuing. Because you did not. You were always strong enough on your own. I just gave you the option not to be." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky paint itself in oranges and purples. They had been married for over 30 years now, had weathered storms and celebrated triumphs, had raised children and watched them leave, had carved a life from wilderness and love. "Do you think it is time?" Daisy asked. Vincent knew what she meant. They had talked about it before. They were getting older, and mountain life was unforgiving to aging bodies. Sam had offered them space on his land, a smaller cabin with less work required. Tommy had suggested they move to the town where he taught, to be near doctors and conveniences. Rose had even offered to have them in San Francisco, though none of them thought that likely. "I think," Vincent said slowly, "that we have a few more years here. I'm not ready to leave our mountain yet. Are you?" "No," Daisy admitted. "Not yet. This is our place, where we became who we are. Then we stay, and when the time comes to move, we will know." But that time never quite came. They stayed in their mountain cabin through their 60s and into their 70s, adapting as needed but never leaving. Their children visited with grandchildren, filling the cabin with youth and energy before departing again. Vincent and Daisy moved slower, but still moved, still worked, still loved their life. One spring morning, when Vincent was 76 and Daisy 72, he did not wake up. Daisy found him in their bed, peaceful in death as he had been in life. The doctor who came from the town said his heart had simply stopped, worn out after a full life lived hard. The grief was crushing. For weeks, Daisy moved through the cabin like a ghost, unable to reconcile Vincent's absence with the space that still held so much of his presence. Her children gathered around her, supporting and loving her, but she felt fundamentally alone for the first time since that alley in Mojave over 50 years ago. "I do not know how to do this without him," she confessed to Sam one night. "We were supposed to grow old together. We were supposed to have more time. You did grow old together, Ma, Sam said gently. You had over 50 years. That is more than most people ever get. It was not enough. A lifetime would not have been enough. But as the weeks turned to months, Daisy found her footing again. Vincent's absence remained a constant ache, but she learned to live with it. She stayed in the cabin, refusing all offers to relocate. This was where Vincent's spirit lived, where their love had flourished. She would not abandon it. She lived another 6 years, tended by her children who took turns visiting, ensuring she was never without company or help. In those years, she wrote down her and Vincent's story, wanting her grandchildren and great-grandchildren to know the truth of their family's origins. She wrote of fighting in an alley, of a mountain man with gentle eyes, of a love that transformed everything. She died quietly in her sleep at 78, in the same bed where Vincent had passed. Her children buried her next to him in a small plot overlooking the valley, surrounded by the mountains they both had loved. On her gravestone, beneath her name and dates, Sam had carved, "She fought alone until she did not have to. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, never forgotten." Years later, when Sam's grandson asked about the inscription, Sam told him the whole story. Of his mother fighting 3 drunks in an alley in Mojave, of his father stepping in with a promise that changed everything, of a love that endured through hardship and joy, through raising children and facing the wilderness, through all the ordinary and extraordinary moments that make a life. They were lucky to find each other, the young man said. No, Sam corrected. They chose each other. Luck was fighting in that alley and having the courage to accept help. Everything after that was choice, commitment, and love. That is the lesson. We all face fights alone sometimes, but we do not have to stay alone. When someone offers us partnership, true partnership built on respect and love, we have to be brave enough to accept it. The young man nodded, understanding settling into his eyes. The story would pass down through the generations, transformed slightly with each telling but maintaining its essential truth. A woman fought alone, and a mountain man promised she never would again. And from that promise, a family grew, a life was built, and a love endured that time could not diminish. In the mountains of California, the cabin still stood, weathered but sturdy, maintained by descendants who valued their history. And on quiet evenings when the sun painted the sky in oranges and purples, it was said you could almost see 2 figures on the porch, sitting together in comfortable silence, forever watching their mountain home. The end.